International expansion is also something that you've emphasized as CEO, and one interesting aspect of that has been a focus on locally produced content. I wonder if you could talk about the ways in which, in a globalized world, in a global economy, locally produced content is important for an iconic company like Disney.
Well, first of all, global growth is imperative for us. We are not only a very durable brand worldwide, but we're a very well-known brand. So I think we have the ability to not just succeed, but to grow and to thrive in many markets around the country for years to come. But in order to do so, it's not just about putting our product there, meaning taking something that's been made for another market, putting a foreign or a local language track on it, and distributing it locally. It's about being locally relevant. And that means operating locally, meaning moving our people to markets so that they understand the markets, the culture, the interests. It's also about being creative locally. There's a lot of talent and a lot of creativity in many, many places around the world, and we have to tap into that content.
About 20 years ago, Kent Anger and Barry Johnson came up with 750 chemicals that could harm the brain during development. Nobody has since then dared to update that number. It's just a guess. Today there has to be more than 1,000 if it was 750 20 years ago. But the problem is also that we have put too little emphasis on this type of research. For example, it has taken so far the OECD 10 years to devise a battery of tests that they could recommend for systematic testing of chemicals for developmental neurotoxicity. That panel, that battery, has not yet been completed and authorized by OECD. So it's taking way too long because it is complicated, but there is so much at stake. Children are just losing IQ points and losing concentration span, memory, or motor functions. But in the present world where there's so much emphasis on knowledge and brain functions, this can also translate into dollars. The EPA has calculated every time a child loses one IQ point because of chemical pollution, it costs society something like $8,000 or $10,000.
If you think about light bulbs, they're an enormous infrastructure. They're in every building in the world, more or less. They have kind of a privileged position above us, around us. They can see, if you think about it, most parts of any room. The kind of key was to say, well, what if we consider a light bulb not to be a light bulb, but actually to be a digital projector? It just happens to be really low resolution. In fact, it's a 1 by 1 pixel digital projector. Turn on the wall switch, and a giant pixel comes out and paints your room. Okay, well, that's ludicrous, but what if you put a higher resolution projector inside that same familiar glass bulb? Well, now you have a device that can illuminate. If you turn on all the pixels the same color, you still have a light bulb in the usual sense. But if you turn on the pixels different amounts and different colors, then you're kind of projecting information out into the world. And if at the same time that you're doing that, you put a little tiny camera inside the bulb, then not only is information flowing out of the glass, but you're collecting optical information. So screw one of those into every one of these fixtures, and suddenly you have a means, potentially, to put display and interaction everywhere throughout the world.
I hate to say it, but probably the best thing that could happen right now is a little consolidation, because one of the reasons that we have so many news sources out there is because up until recently, the local newspaper in everybody's town was the only newspaper they got, pretty much. Well, now, if you're consuming news online, then what's the difference between the local newspaper that I read in Kentucky versus the one that the guy reads in Dallas or the one that somebody reads out in North Dakota? And it turns out that if you did a comparison, and I'm just making this figure up, but I'm going to guess that it's about 90% similar stuff. I mean, when you take out high school football scores, restaurant reviews, and local social gatherings, and you just have, like, regional and national stuff in there, you really can get that stuff from anywhere. And so I think what's happened is a lot of these newspapers and local TV stations don't realize that now they're all in direct competition with not only each other but the nationals as well.
One seminal difference in policy remains. The Coalition has not matched what is Labour's most important innovation promise. That is to bring together responsibilities for innovation, industry, science and research under one single federal minister. Innovation responsibilities currently lie within the powerful Department of Education and Science, and while there is a separate industry department, it has little influence within Cabinet. This has hampered policy development and given Australia's innovation policies a distinctly science and research bias. It is the scientists, rather than the engineers, who call the tune in innovation policy in Canberra. So it's no surprise our policies are all about boosting government-funded research, and later commercialising their results.
We've decided to adopt, just as a loose theme for the course, a biological theme, so that you can see the connections between chemistry and biology and the things that you might consider doing in the future. We want you to think about the molecules that are relevant to your body, the processes that occur in your body, the chemistry that's going on, and how energy plays a role. And we divided the course into 4 sections, and after each section there will be a midterm. The first one, or an exam. The first one is about matter.
We're not running out of oil. The first thing one can say with absolute confidence is that we're not about to run out of oil. We're definitely not. But what we are approaching is the end of the first half. And this is one way to describe it. And this chapter in history lasted about 150 years since the first oil was produced. And we're coming to the end of that. And you have to find oil before you can produce it. And when we look back in history, we can find that the peak of discovery was in 1964. And that the discovery of oil has been falling ever since, relentlessly. And it's been falling despite a worldwide search, always aimed at the biggest and best prospects. No one's looking for the smallest and the worst, the biggest and the best. It's been falling despite amazing technological and geological advances. We understand this business so much more than we did. And finally, it's been falling despite a very happy economic environment whereby most of the cost of exploration is written off against tax. So I would say, in view of all of those incentives and all of those benefits, if discovery has actually been falling relentlessly, there is no good reason to think that this trend is going to change direction. So, in other words, we've passed the peak.
So what influences consumers in different parts of the world? Many factors affect how we as individuals and societies live, buy, and consume. And it should be readily apparent that culture has a profound impact on the way consumers perceive themselves, the products they buy and consume, and the processes by which those products should be purchased, and the organizations that sell those products.
And then finally, briefly, but say a little bit about the way in which the 7 Years' War created a new sense of empire. Question mark, because there are questions about how new this is, but it certainly intensified Britain's interest in things imperial. And I think most historians, both British and American, would agree that that new interest and that determination to govern the empire more closely played a key role in preparing the ground for the series of parliamentary attempts to tax the American colonies without their consent, which culminated in the rebellion and eventual independence of 13 of them. So there's a close connection, and historians have always seen this, between the 7 Years' War and the American Revolution.
I should say one more thing about theory. It's great to discover theory, but you have to lose a lot. And you may have noticed, or maybe you didn't, how much you lose. Partly you don't notice it much because here at the university everybody's dedicated to theory. And what's left out is perception, because you use your mind, not your eyes. Skill, you're not supposed to have any particular sort of bodily kind of skills. There's a kind of mental thing, but let's not call that skill. I mean, I'm just calling skill the way you cope with everyday stuff that you use and so forth. Intuition, it's not fair to have intuition. I mean, you can have intuition, but it's not theory. It's not something that everybody has to believe until you can put it into language and argue for it. Gets rid of emotions, the body, tradition.
My PhD student, Elaine Chong, did what was called a meta-analysis, where you analyse the literature very carefully to see what evidence there is to suggest that what we eat, particularly in terms of antioxidants, on preventing you getting macular degeneration.
Because ophthalmologists have been using antioxidants quite a lot.
That's right. There have been studies looking at whether antioxidant supplements slow the progression once you have the disease. Whereas this study was looking at trying to stop you getting it.
The surgical simulation project is designed to provide an environment where people can practice doing surgery, where the surgeon can see and feel a scenario that they would be seeing and interacting with in the actual surgery. It's sort of like flight simulation in that if your pilot is flying a 747, you would like to have had that pilot fly a simulator until
So far in our discussion of chemical reactions, we have assumed that these reactions only go in one direction, the forward direction, from left to right as we read it in an equation. That's why our arrow points from left to right. Reactants react together to make products. However, this is not exactly how things occur in nature. In fact, practically every chemical reaction is reversible, meaning the products can also react together to reform the reactants that they were made of. So instead of writing that single arrow facing from left to right, a more appropriate symbol would be a double arrow, one going from left to right and one going from right to left. Reactants are continuously reacting to form products, but at the same time, as those products are formed, they remake the reactants. They're both going simultaneously, forming each other. This is what we would call a state of equilibrium.
The arms race that we see in computer terms and on the internet is basically that the protection mechanisms that people are putting in place, such as firewalls, antivirus software, are now increasingly having to become more complex, as well as new additional protection tools as the attackers and hackers and people trying to do malicious things on the internet are developing new attack techniques.
Final year business students have to write a 5,000-word essay on market trends.
The time of the maths lecture has been changed to 10:30.
You must submit your assignments by next Friday at the latest.